What's up, guys? It's April 24th, 2018. It's Q&A time for the week. I did open Q&A this week right here on Facebook. And let's get threads pulled up. I'll go ahead and dive into it. I did have a question or two through Messenger, so I'm just going to do at least one. Let me do that one first. All right. All right, first question. So every few months, I'll spend a week, sometimes two, and I'll pull all carbs except nuts and veggies and do a bodybuilder style keto type diet to get insulin sensitivity back up. So I know it varies per person, but how long does it actually take to do this generally? I ask because I used to use 2 weeks with clients and myself, but now with intermittent fasting and fasting talk in general, I question whether or not I need to go that long. Okay, so yeah, it's going to be individual, contextual. You can do, like, when you do stuff like this, you can do something like test your blood glucose, monitor your pumps, all those signs of insulin sensitivity that you could normally use. You should see them getting better. You should see your fasting blood glucose and your postprandial blood glucose going down. And you should see maybe your pump's getting better, maybe not, just because you're taking all your carbs out. But in general, I don't know that there's a specific amount of time. But I would say if you're doing this periodically, like it sounds like, it shouldn't take real long. The only times I would say it takes a lot longer would be if you actually have a significant amount of body fat. You got to get rid of the body fat as well. But if you are in okay condition, good condition, and you're just doing this simply to enhance insulin sensitivity, then you can get it done pretty quick. I mean, that's one thing I really like about fasting, is that you can really speed up the process. For some people, I might just have them do a day of like a 24-hour fast, and then, or a couple days in a row of like a modified fast, a 16-hour, or just even do intermittent fasting for a week, where I'm not even necessarily reducing their calories a ton, maybe a little bit, pulling some carbs. But that speeds up the process a ton. I would be willing to bet that you can get the job done in a week. If it's just like I have clients that are kind of later in a growth phase. They're not, they don't have too much body fat. They want to keep growing, and I want them to keep growing. I don't want to have to go into a full-fledged cut. So we'll do, I'll just literally put fasting days in their plan, permanently, at least for the rest of the growth phase. Something like every, twice a week on a non-training day, we'll only do 2 meals that day and fast the rest of the day. Keeps them at least good enough blood glucose wise, that I can keep pushing that calorie surplus. So that's another way that it can be done. Or you can just go ahead and be real aggressive with it, pull all the carbs out, like you said. You could start with the fasting days, maybe do a couple days in a row where you do an 18-hour, maybe only eat twice those days, and then just the rest of the week ride it out with no carbs, just the trace amounts from veggies and nuts, like you mentioned, and you should be probably going to be good. Again, you'd need to test your blood glucose to really see what the impact was, but it should speed up the process a lot when you start adding in fasting in there versus just pulling out carbs and keeping your meal frequency the same. Okay. Next one. Let's see. Could you touch on the importance of blood glucose regulation when using GH or GH mimetics? Okay, so growth hormone does raise blood glucose. It can cause insulin resistance with long-term use. It can. So I mean, the importance is that that's what it does, and you definitely need to monitor it. It's going to be dose dependent. It could be a lot or a little depending on the dose. And a lot of it also depends on the diet. So somebody that's using maybe a couple units just for free fatty acid mobilization in a cutting phase, they're already in a calorie deficit. Their insulin sensitivity is probably already going to be better. They probably don't need to worry about it. They're using a couple units, morning fasted, whatever. Everything else they're doing is enhancing sensitivity. So that one thing probably isn't going to make a difference. It could, probably not though. In a growth phase, if it's used multiple times a day, also pushing carbohydrates and calories in general pretty high, then yeah, it's going to speed up that process of insulin resistance. You're already going to get some insulin resistance at a point just from the food. It's going to happen. It's different speeds with everyone, but it's definitely going to speed up that process. So all the things that you would normally do to regulate blood glucose, you need to make sure you stay on top of it, whether it's GDAs, over the counter or something like metformin, or people are regulating it with insulin use, especially in the cutting phase, maybe not so much, but in the growth phase, you have the push and pull of GH and insulin, and it can become very useful in that regard, just controlling blood sugar. You're making sure that your beta cells aren't too taxed, that you're not simply walking around with high serum insulin levels. You're resting your beta cells, your blood glucose is good. There's not really much else to comment on the importance of it, because it is important. Most of us know the side effects of becoming insulin resistant as far as what it does to our physique and what it does to our health. So I don't really have much else to say about that unless there was specific examples. I hope that answers the question. I know it was kind of general. Could you share some thoughts on adherence and which traits more adherent clients have in common, or how they can improve adherence? Well, I think there's general personality types that just have better adherence naturally. They don't have any problem with it. They have they get focused on a goal, and they're very determined, and they do it, and they're okay with, whatever it takes to get there. But I think that there are other personality types that aren't that way at all, especially ones that are like kind of fly by the seat of their pants, not very good planners, very sporadic, stuff like that, in a lifestyle that requires a lot of planning, really, a lot of routine. So those people might struggle. Another thing is just trying to get through to people that it's not a punishment. I think that a lot of people, not a lot, but some people see it that way, and they have a hard time adhering long term, because when something gets hard, or they have to do something that they're just not quite comfortable with, that's maybe not it's not the fun part of their journey, then they kind of see it as a punishment. They don't really want to do it. They're like, is this worth it? So it has to have worth to the person, and it has to not be a punishment. They have to have it in their head that it's not. And then they're going to have an easier time adhering. But general traits, like I said, you're going to have personality types that are just much better at adherence, that have no problem with adherence. Your type A type people are going to be probably pretty good with adherence. And then your sporadic people might have problems, but you need to get through to them the purpose of what they're doing. That again, it's not a punishment, that it is, show them that it is sustainable, and they can kind of get past the, I need to go from point A to point B thing, versus I need to just start and never stop. Okay, I missed one. Might sound like a silly question, but is there a difference between how the body digests and uses fruit, vegetables to other forms of carbs? Yes and no. The biggest difference is fructose isn't readily stored as muscle glycogen, and it's mostly going to be stored as liver glycogen. It's not that that's necessarily a bad thing. We still need some liver glycogen. There's still a chance that we can be depleting some liver glycogen. We use liver glycogen. We produce glucose from the liver. So it's not that that's necessarily bad. It's just that we primarily want muscle glycogen. So If in the case of vegetables, yeah, there is fructose in vegetables. It's not in a super high amount with just because they're lower carbohydrate content than something like fruit. You could definitely consume too much fructose through fruit. Too much kind of depends on the person, what they're burning through, how much liver glycogen they need. But in moderate amount, I don't have problems with people eating fruit. I actually suggest it in some of the plans. Very micronutrient dense food. There are benefits to fruit as a whole. So like I said, I'm not really against it. It's just that we have to keep in mind that we're not really getting the muscle glycogen focus that we want. And so just keep it moderate. But no, as far as using it, I think it's okay. And that's really the biggest difference in terms of digestion or utilization, I should say. Okay, staple exercises for developing pec shape and size. Well, pec shape depends on insertions. A lot of that's genetic. So, you can't really do a ton about it. I know people talk about building upper pec and lower pec, though I find just having a bigger pec in general gives it more of that shelf look, bringing it up where it's merging with the collarbone there. You don't have a big flat spot and then, all the meat on the bottom. You can do things like work different angles and stuff, but in general, aside from a variety of angles, there's nothing that's really going to change the insertion points of your pecs. So, you're kind of SOL there. With size, building muscle, obviously, whatever you feel the most activation from, there's staple pressing exercises that a lot of people do, but at the end of the day, you need to make sure that you're feeling what you're doing. You have plenty of activation in the pec, and that's actually going to break the tissue down and help you grow. With that said, that could be anything. Some people do great with bench pressing, some people don't. Some people love dumbbells, some people don't. So again, whatever you can feel the best, whatever allows you to progressively overload, whatever allows you to train without getting injured, all that good stuff. That's going to probably be your best bet. When I take MK677, my appetite increases dramatically, which is a great thing for me, as typically have a very poor appetite. Unfortunately, as Scott Stevenson and Scott McNally touched on recently, the effects are short-lived. I know MK677 causes ghrelin response, which is what increases the appetite. What are some things to look into why I need something like MK77 to get the appetite needed for me to grow? Progress is stalled without the added appetite, and am I possibly having leptin and ghrelin imbalances? Okay. So Dr. Scott actually commented on this, and he says MK677 is a ghrelin receptor agonist. So you might have some insensitivity brought on by its use, but there are many things that contribute to poor appetite. Having a healthy liver, i.e. not stressed by oral AAS, could be very important for appetite, for instance. Okay, so Scott brings up a good point. There are he's basically what he's saying is there could be some insensitivity at the receptor just because of continued use of the MK677. Now, there was an article on a forum by, I believe it was Dappy True. He was, one of the guys that really came out and started talking about peptides a lot, who's kind of the go-to peptide guy for a long time. He talked about use of long-acting ghrelin mimetics and some of the complications. This is one of them. The insensitivity to it, just repetitively, basically abusing that pulse. Ghrelin has a lot of benefits as far as making you feel good, making you hungry. There's some mood balancing. It is beneficial to have it, but it shouldn't be overstimulated. our body pulses it. I talked about this in a post that I wrote the other day about how we have natural pulse and kind of a circadian rhythm, if you will, of ghrelin. And we don't really want to pulse this too often or more than we need to. Yeah, it will cause more hunger, but yeah, we're also bringing on that insensitivity by basically abusing it. So I'm not really a fan of the long-term ghrelin mimetics, MK677 being one of the stronger ones. There are others. With that said, looking at the other information, he says fasted glucose is 95 to 110, 2 hours post-meal with moderate high carbs. BG is in the 80s. This is prior to starting back on MK677. Okay, so knowing the nature of the MK and what it does to your blood glucose, I'd be willing to bet that your blood glucose is probably higher than that right now. High blood sugar in general and just lack of insulin sensitivity will make appetite really screwy. You're not going to be as hungry. People that have their insulin sensitivity really dialed in tend to have pretty good appetite. That could, sometimes it's just because they're leaner, but in general, they tend to have pretty good appetite and a pretty good rhythm as far as the ghrelin goes. So, I don't know what your body fat looks like or what you look like or what your diet's like, but you probably need to be a little bit more insulin sensitive at this point. You say your A1C is 4.8 and your blood glucose is in the 80s after meals, but it's 95 to 110 fasted. Again, that's okay. It's getting hot. The fast is getting high. But if you add the MK in there, you're right back up to high blood glucose again anyhow. So really, again, you need to control insulin sensitivity. And then there's a ton of other things that go into digestion. Dr. Scott mentions your liver. Yeah, liver bile, bile production's huge in terms of digestion. Just overall inflammation and irritation of the gut. You don't want to have an inflamed gut lining. You don't want to interrupt your enteric nervous system, which is in the lining of your stomach. You do those things, your appetite's not going to be good. If you have sufficient gastric emptying, things are moving through at a good pace. You're not drinking too much water with meals, watering down the pH balance, and things are really moving through. You're going to get hungry. You're going to have hunger. If there's too frequent of meal frequency, maybe your meals are overlapping, we need to back off, you need to back off the meal frequency, make sure digestion's good. So people that eat, 6, 7, whatever meals when they're in a growth phase, well, every single meal is overlapping at that point. You're not fully digesting everything, probably barely bringing your blood glucose down to normal before you eat again. So you want to probably space things out a little bit and help that way. You may even try an intermittent fasting protocol for a while to get insulin sensitivity up and to get appetite up. You don't even necessarily have to lower calories. You might just be able to keep them condensed into, 3 meals and do an IF protocol where you're doing 16-hour and fast and 8-hour eating window. There's a lot of things that you can do in that regard, but really you need to make sure that digestion is 100% as optimal as you can get it. Your meal spacing your frequency isn't too much, and your insulin sensitivity is good. You do these things and digestion is probably going to be good. But if you have too much body fat, you're already fighting an uphill battle because the sensitivity is probably not going to be good. Your body doesn't want to get any bigger. There's a point where we have mechanisms that are slowing things down because it just simply doesn't want to get any bigger. So maybe you need to reset and restart and grow little bits at a time. You do a growth phase, you end up 4 to 5 pounds heavier than the last growth phase. You cut, you repeat, you end up a little bit heavier the next time you cut and you repeat. The quality of your physique keeps going up. You keep gaining muscle, little bits at a time. You're not force feeding, you're not abusing digestion. So again, there's a lot of things that could go into it. But I'm not really going to be able to give you an exact recommendation without a little more context, but I think those are some good suggestions that'll probably help get you started. All right, guys, coming up on 20 minutes. That was all I had for this week. There was a couple after I cut it off, but it looks like they got answered. So make sure. All right, yep. I think we're good to go. Great questions, and I will talk to you guys next week.